I'll take whatever the hell deal they can make right now to deal with sequestration. I mean, the problem now is that they've left town, and all of this has now been put off into the lame duck session.
Of course, there we have Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta bemoaning the reality of sequestration. As a part of sequestration, though, there's something going on right now in the federal government that is particularly interesting, and I really mean that, so just stay with us, because this is what's happening here. The White House has directed the Office of Management and Budget to tell enormous government contractors like Lockheed Martin that they do not have to comply with something right now because of sequestration called the WARN Act. Now, first, of course, sequestration is across-the-board cuts that would hit defense. Estimates are somewhere in the neighborhood of $50 billion of defense cuts would happen without anyone doing anything other than just letting things go forward as they are. That's supposed to happen. Contractors, civilian employees of the Department of Defense, are the ones who would tend to get hit first by that. Places like Lockheed Martin, BAE Systems. These are companies that are covered by a 1988 federal law called the WARN Act. Now, the WARN Act is the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act. The Obama administration, it seems to me, I would offer to you, does not want the WARN Act to do what it was enacted to do, which is to give people 60 days notice, if you're of a corporation of a certain size, that you may, in fact, be laid off. The Obama administration is doing this because they're supposed to give out those notices right before Election Day, a few days before people go to the polls. We're talking about 123,000 jobs at risk. And oh, by the way, a lot of those jobs are in the state of Virginia, which is a crucial swing state for the election. So the OMB sent out a letter saying that you don't have to comply with this law. Let's put up some of the text of that so you can see it. It says the Department of Labor concluded that it is neither necessary nor appropriate for federal contractors to provide WARN Act notice to employees 60 days in advance of the potential sequestration because of uncertainty about whether the sequestration will occur. This is very interesting because the whole purpose of this law is to give people notice about a pending series of layoffs. It is not the You're Fired Act. It is the WARN Act. They're supposed to give people advance notice. And so the administration is using a dodge here. They're saying because it's conceivable that we'll get some kind of a deal, as we were just talking about in the segment before this, we don't have to tell people this. We're just going to waive this law. And they didn't stop there. They haven't just given guidance saying, don't warn, don't use the WARN Act. They said this as well in this OMB memo. Any resulting employee compensation costs for WARN Act liability as determined by a court, as well as attorney's fees and other litigation costs, irrespective of litigation outcome, would qualify as allowable costs. In layman's terms, the federal government is saying, hey, there's an election coming up. Don't tell all these people that they may be getting fired, even though there's a federal statute that says they have the right to know and prepare for getting fired. And if they decide to sue you, meaning those fired workers, we will cover your costs, the federal government.
Amazing.
Because guess what? We are using taxpayer dollars. So we're going to take from all the good citizens of this country and shovel it to you guys. There's another thing going on here too as well, though, which is that the federal government is really making these contractors, to borrow from Don Corleone, an offer they can't refuse, because they live at the whim of the federal government. They need these massive multi-billion-dollar contracts in order to survive, in order to employ people. So it's not only they're whispering this into the ears of people at BAE Systems, Lockheed, etc. There's also this secondary order effect of, well, if the Obama administration wins, guess what? Now you have to deal with them after you didn't go along with this little plan. Now, I want to get to you guys on this, but first, people are asking about whether this is even legal. In fact, Lindsey Graham has decided to ask this question. He has said that Senator Graham has said, I will do everything in my power to make sure not one taxpayer dollar is spent reimbursing companies for failure to comply with WARN Act. That is so beyond the pale, I think it is patently illegal. It smacks of politics. Is this patently illegal?
Stinks to high heaven, Ben.
Well, Lindsey Graham's a lawyer. You should know.
I think that this is illegal, and in fact, I've checked with some counsels on Capitol Hill who also believe that this is illegal. So I think we'll be having some hearings about this if it ever comes to pass. But I think that what we're really seeing here is crossing a line. It's crossing a line into a command and control economy, one that's directed from the White House, and one in which the White House feels comfortable essentially having its representatives offer companies a bribe that they must take, a bribe that comes with a command to break the law. That's essentially what they're doing here. And I think that the thing that we need to keep in mind about this is our willingness to pay the cost of any employee litigation, any court costs, is essentially the government saying to these companies, don't worry about breaking the law because we'll be the ones, the taxpayer will be the ones defending you in court.
They're ordering companies that depend on their largesse, by the way, to function at the levels they're functioning right now, to break the law. And if they don't break the law, I see it looks like they are going to be or rather, if they do break the law, they're going to be backstopped by the taxpayer.
Well, I'll use worse language. I think this is disgusting. And I think this is a brazen disregard for the fate of hundreds of thousands of people who will potentially be unemployed. If this isn't an advertisement for Mitt Romney's "I care about you, he doesn't" message, then I don't know what is. This is the most obvious example of this president playing politics with unemployment and everything else that I think we've seen in 4 years.
So let me ask a question from a political calculation. The Obama team has obviously taken a look at this and said these notices going out on or about November 2nd, which would be 60 days before the sequestration date of January 2nd, correct?
Yes.
4 days before the election, would have a political cost for them. Is that true? Would all these voters in Virginia who work for these defense contractors hold the sequestration inevitability against President Obama?
I think they would, Will, because it raises the reality of what our economy is right now. It actually shows people that jobs are on the line here. I think that also it brings the lie, or rather it gives the lie to the Obama administration's claim so far, which is that don't worry about the spending. The spending's going to continue. Everything's going to be fine. This very clearly, they're not saying here that there won't be job cuts, by the way. That's what's so sort of insidious. They're saying, well, there may not be job cuts, so let's pretend like there won't be job cuts until after January.
When there are job cuts, who cares?
Then 130,000 people can get tossed off the rolls.
And if I could jump in here, President Obama knows better. Because as a young senator from Illinois, he actually supported the WARN Act in his first term. He issued a press release in 2007 saying that for too long employers have failed to notify workers that they're about to lose their jobs due to mass layoffs. And then in 2007, he co-sponsored the WARN Act, which would have extended the minimum notice to 90 days. This is someone who actually knows this issue.
Will, let me respond to your question as a Virginia voter and as someone who's witnessed over the past several weeks a deluge of ads from the Romney team highlighting the fact that these job cuts, these layoffs were incoming. Virginia has been largely insulated from the economic downturn. It's been insulated because of its proximity to Washington, D.C. The bubble that exists there is incredible to witness. You can walk into the city and walk around it and see in the areas in Northern Virginia people who are completely insulated.
The richest counties in the country. The richest counties in the country are in Northern Virginia.
Thanks to defense.
Thanks and largely to defense and to the expansion of government. This is essentially a wake-up call. It's an exposure to reality. It's an exposure to the idea that, hey, wait a minute, I might have to find a job in the Obama economy.
Even government employees, a loyal constituency, as we've already started to see, that's going to be one of the clearest Obama voting blocks. Government employees, even government employees are going to get hit. And by the way, I'm somewhat familiar with how they do a lot of these sort of large budgetary issues for defense. These are programs that are scheduled out years in advance. If they think there's $50 billion about to get lopped off, there's no way that's not going to have an immediate impact. They can't pretend that money's there if it's not there. They're going to have to cut programs, and the administration knows this. They just want to sort of push back the day of reckoning until after the election.
We've talked before many times at this table about how personal the issue of unemployment is. People will allow for a lot of crass politicization of various issues. Jobs are personal. You take that home with you. And I really think of all of the issues that have come up, this is the most sort of the biggest indictment of this administration. If people understood and heard more about this, I'm so glad we're covering it tonight. If they understood what this means, what the president is doing with this, peeling back the WARN Act and saying we don't have to enforce this, if they really understood who he was putting in jeopardy and at stake, I think they would be absolutely appalled.
Will this story make it into the mainstream media?
I don't know.
There's a level of complexity here that will be difficult.
This story was first uncovered in
August.
In August, commentary uncovered that the Department of Labor was telling defense companies, don't issue these pink slips. And commentary covered the fact that President Obama had supported extending the notice 90 days, 3 months in advance before pink slips. And here we are talking about it in October.
It's not difficult if you understand the facts. I just think it could be difficult in terms of actually having ads running on this. I mean, and people hear sequestration, they think, this
word itself is
all you have to say is Obama has decided you don't need to be warned that you are about to be fired because it's politically expedient for him to do that.
And I think that this also ties into a broader narrative, which is the White House just deciding some laws good, we like, we're going to enforce them.
Of course.
Other laws are bad. We've seen that across the board. We've seen that with immigration. We've seen that with DOMA. And now this law that's supposed to protect workers, Obama is all about workers, is not being utilized.
This is the end game of corporate cronyism. This is the situation where they want to dictate from Washington who gets to play and who doesn't. They get to decide, you know, if you don't go along with our game, if you don't take our bribe, we're going to come back to you next year, and maybe that contract doesn't come back to you. Maybe those people...
Big government likes big contractor, and big contractor likes big government, by the way.
It's appalling.
So another U.S. border agent...
I'm sorry.
Another U.S. border agent, unfortunately, terribly, has been murdered on the job. Amy has details when we come back.